The cry did not sound like any ordinary cry. It was sharp, cyclical, slicing through the air like glass, splintering in the silence of the Hale mansion. Gabriel Turner stopped mid-stride, mop still dripping onto the polished tiles of the service corridor. He had only been working as a janitor here for a week, assigned strictly to the lower wings. Staff were warned, almost threatened, never to wander near the 4th floor. The upper wing, they called it, the forbidden level. But the sound clawed through his chest, unmistakable. Not hunger, not sleepiness, not a tantrum. It was panic, the kind of panic he had heard before, long ago, from his little sister when the world became too loud for her to bear. Another cry tore out, higher, desperate. He looked toward the stairwell. His hand tightened around the mop handle. He could hear Mrs. Dalton, the head housekeeper, calling from below. "Stay clear of the 4th floor, mister. Turner, just keep to your route." But Gabriel was already moving. He couldn't stop himself. His boots hit the stairs 2 at a time, echoing against the marble. The mansion seemed to grow heavier with each step, as if the walls themselves wanted to hold him back. He reached the landing of the 4th floor. The hallway was dim, a row of tall windows shuttered, only slivers of light slipping through. And there it was, the sound again, muffled but urgent, from a door left slightly ajar at the very end. His pulse thundered in his ears. He pushed forward. Inside, a projector flickered colors across the walls, sensory lights spinning in chaotic rhythm. On the carpet sat a little girl, maybe 7 years old, knees drawn to her chest, rocking hard, fists pounding against her temples. Her head snapped forward, hitting the edge of a low bookshelf in sickening rhythm. Again, again, again. No supervision, no comfort, only raw fear repeating itself. Gabriel froze at the threshold. Every part of him screamed to turn back, to obey the rule, to avoid losing this job he desperately needed. But deeper inside, an older instinct roared louder. The memory of his sister, curled under the dinner table, face streaked with tears, rocking the same way. Forgotten by everyone else, but not by him. He dropped the mop. "Hey!" His voice was low, almost drowned by her cries. "Hey, sweetheart." The girl didn't respond. She rocked harder, head striking wood. He stepped carefully inside, crouching a few feet away, hands open, palms up where she could see. He didn't reach for her. He knew better. He let the silence stretch, only his presence steadying the chaos. Then slowly, deliberately, he traced one hand across his chest, the sign his grandmother had taught him. Safe. For the first time, the girl's eyes flickered toward him. Just a glance, then back to rocking. But the rhythm slowed, slightly. Gabriel kept his hand where it was, steady, visible. His breath matched hers. He whispered again, "You're safe." Another glance, this time, longer. And then, her head dipped, the pounding eased. But before he could exhale, before he could believe she was calming, her voice ripped out again, shriller than before. She threw herself forward, striking harder against the shelf. Gabriel's stomach clenched. No one was coming. No one had heard her. No one but him. If this moment has already pulled you in, don't let go. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next chapters of Gabriel's story. Because what happens next will change everything. The little girl's cries had turned guttural, caught somewhere between a scream and a gasp for air. The kind that didn't just echo off walls, it carved through bone. Gabriel stayed where he was, crouched low, heart hammering, mouth dry. He knew this sound. He had once heard it from behind a locked bedroom door, when his kid sister, Anya, couldn't take the flickering hallway light one more second. When the world pressed too close, when language failed her and all she had left was volume and motion. He'd been only 13 then, but he'd known enough to sit down outside her door and wait. Not with force, not with questions, but with stillness. And that's what he gave this child now. Not commands, not fear, just presence. The little girl, he didn't even know her name yet, rocked in a smaller rhythm now, shallower. Her hands still clenched her sleeves, twisting the fabric till it cut into her skin, but the sharp banging had paused. Gabriel slowly shifted his weight and sat cross-legged a little closer, careful not to close the distance completely. His hands moved again, one to his chest, the other over his heart. Safe. She blinked, a flicker, a moment, barely noticeable, but he saw it. Her breathing hitched, then steadied. One of her fists unclenched, just slightly. He dared not smile. That would be too much stimulation. So he softened his gaze, let his shoulders relax, and whispered, "It's okay now. You're not alone." The room was still spinning with soft projector lights, red, blue, yellow, green, but they were no longer clashing, just moving. She looked at him again, not long, not steady, but enough for their eyes to meet, enough for Gabriel to see it, terror laced with exhaustion. And then, something strange. She reached out, not to him, but to a worn stuffed elephant at her side, grabbed it, pulled it to her chest, and buried her face in its ear. A coping gesture, a calming tool. Gabriel exhaled, slow and silent. That was a win, a small, trembling victory. "You've got your friend there," he said softly. "That's good. He's here too. You're not by yourself." He sat back just enough to give her more space, but not so far she'd think he was leaving. "I used to have one too. My sister had a frog," he added, mostly to the silence. "Bright green. Carried it everywhere, even to the dentist. He was brave for her when she couldn't be." Another twitch. The Seattle girl's rocking had almost stopped now. Her knees still hugged her chest, but her forehead no longer slammed against the shelf. Gabriel risked the gentlest question. "What's his name?" "Your elephant?" No answer, of course. But she blinked again, slower this time. Her grip on the toy eased just a fraction. He realized it wasn't just her who was calming. Something in him had cracked open too. A quiet pain he hadn't touched in years. He remembered sitting by Ania's grave that last spring, clutching the same frog she'd carried till the very end. No one had come to the funeral except him and the hospice nurse. No friends, no family left, just him, the dirt and the silence. And now here he was, years later, on a fourth floor he wasn't allowed to be on, in a room filled with lights and crying, watching a little girl try to make sense of a world that had never spoken her language. Another twist. Footsteps. Sharp. Clicking. Authoritative. Coming fast. Gabriel's body went rigid, instinctively shielding the girl without touching her. The door flung open. A woman in a navy suit stepped in, impeccable, angular, eyes like winter. Victoria Hale. She took one look at Gabriel, and her expression snapped to rage. What are you doing in here?" The girl whimpered again, flinching toward Gabriel. "I heard her screaming," he said, calm but firm. "No one came." "This is unauthorized," Victoria snapped. "You're not even supposed to be on this floor." "I know," he said, but she was hurting herself. He gestured toward the bookshelf, the small blood mark on the corner. Her daughter's blood. Victoria's gaze flicked to it, then to her daughter, then to the janitor crouched inches away. The girl didn't move toward her mother. She stayed near Gabriel, silent, watching. Victoria's face faltered, just for a breath. "Get out," she said, voice low and sharp. "Now!" Gabriel stood slowly. "Yes, ma'am." He moved back, giving the girl one last glance. He touched his chest again. Safe. And she blinked once, not fast, not in fear, just once, slow and clear, then wrapped the elephant tighter to her chest. Gabriel had barely stepped back into the hallway before the door slammed shut behind him. The click of the lock was deliberate, cold. He stood there for a second, eyes on the door. The projector light still leaked through the gap beneath. Color danced silently across his boots. Inside, Lila's whimpers began to rise again. He took a step back, then another. He knew better than to linger. He'd broken a rule, multiple in fact. touched a space that wasn't his, crossed an invisible line drawn by power, money, and fear. Still, part of him stayed behind even as his feet moved. Inside the room, Victoria Hale knelt stiffly beside her daughter. "Lila," she whispered, voice clipped, rehearsed. "Sweetheart." "It's okay now." But the girl flinched at her voice, shrinking deeper into the corner, clutching the stuffed elephant like a shield. Victoria reached for her, slow but authoritative. "Let's get you out of this room." "It's overstimulating. You need—" Lila screamed, no words, no names, just a raw, high-pitched scream that bounced off the walls and made the projector lights look like strobe pulses. Victoria winced, startled but not entirely surprised. She tried again. "Lila, stop. Mommy's here. Look at me." The girl thrashed as Victoria touched her arm. Her legs kicked out, knocking over the small bookshelf. Books tumbled. The elephant hit the floor. "Lila!" Victoria's voice sharpened. "Stop it!" "Now!" Lila hit herself again, open palm to temple, over and over. Her hair stuck to her damp cheeks. The scream became a sob. In the hallway, Gabriel paused at the end of the corridor. He could hear everything, every hit, every cry. He looked around. Empty. No staff, no nanny, no security. Just him. And that sound again. The same sound that pulled him up here in the first place. Back in the room, Victoria stood over her daughter, lips tight, fists clenched. Then, "I'm taking you to the calming suite," she muttered. She reached down, arms under Lila's legs and back, and lifted her. The child fought like a live wire. Elbows, knees, screams, head-butting her mother's chin. Victoria staggered slightly but didn't drop her. She moved toward the door, face locked in icy restraint. But then, twist, Lila screamed one word, broken but clear. "No!" And then another, shrieked between gasps. "Him!" Victoria froze. "What?" Lila's head twisted back toward the door, eyes wide, frantic, hands reaching out. "Him!" Gabriel was already halfway down the stairs when a voice cut through the air. Not Victoria's, not one he'd heard before, small, desperate. "Him!" He stopped. He turned slowly and saw Victoria standing in the open doorway, her daughter writhing in her arms. Lila's eyes locked onto his, arms outstretched, her crying eased, not stopped, but cracked, softened. "Please," she whimpered. "Please." Not a command, not a tantrum, a request. Victoria looked at her daughter, then at Gabriel, then back again. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "She hasn't said anything coherent in days." Gabriel said nothing, just stood still, waiting. Victoria's jaw clenched. She shifted Lila in her arms, but the girl screamed again, flailing until Victoria had no choice but to put her down. The moment her feet touched the floor, Lila ran. Not away, to Gabriel. She stopped a few feet in front of him. Didn't touch, just looked up at him with tear-streaked cheeks and whispered, "Safe?" Gabriel didn't move. He raised his hand slowly, touched his chest. "Safe." Lila mirrored the motion. She remembered. Then, without another word, she sat down cross-legged right there on the hallway floor, elephant in lap, breath slowing. Silence. Gabriel knelt beside her, not touching, just sitting close. Victoria stood frozen in the doorway, a billionaire who had conquered boardrooms, demolished competitors, rebuilt empires, now utterly powerless in front of a janitor and her own daughter. "Who are you?" she asked, voice tight. Gabriel didn't look at her. "I'm someone who listened," he said. Lila reached out and touched Gabriel's shoe. The hallway had never been so quiet. No orders barked, no echo of staff heels, no machines humming behind closed doors, just the hush of something impossible. Victoria Hale stood motionless, one hand still clutching the doorknob as if it were the only solid thing left. In front of her, her daughter, the same girl who thrashed, screamed, recoiled from even a shadow, sat still, not sedated, not frozen, Still. Gabriel sat beside her, grounded and unmoving, his presence soft but steady. He didn't try to touch her, didn't press, but then, twist. Lila shifted. She reached out, not to the elephant, not to her mother, but to Gabriel. She leaned toward him, slowly, carefully, as if testing the weight of gravity itself, and then, with a breath that trembled all the way through her shoulders, she collapsed into his arms. Gabriel caught her instinctively. She didn't cry, she didn't flinch, she just buried her face into his chest like she belonged there. The hallway seemed to stop breathing. Gabriel didn't speak. His arms folded gently around her, not tight, not claiming, just enough. A shelter, not a cage. He felt her heartbeat slow against him, felt her shoulders drop, felt trust, not demanded, not forced, offered. Behind them, Victoria's world tilted. She didn't move forward, couldn't. Her daughter, her only child, was in the arms of a man she didn't know, a janitor, an outsider, a stranger, and yet Lila was calm, not mute, not rigid, not lost in stimming loops or panic cycles. Calm. Tears still streaked her cheeks, but her body had found a rhythm, breathing in Gabriel's tempo. Victoria's fingers tightened around the brass handle, her knuckles white. Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in years, she didn't have a response. No instruction, no lecture, no fix, only disbelief. Gabriel didn't look at her. He stayed with Lila, whispering something only she could hear. Words weren't important. Tone was. And his was steady, warm, low. After long minutes, Lila stirred. She didn't pull away completely, just enough to sit upright again, still leaning lightly against his side. Gabriel met her eyes. "You good?" he asked quietly. She gave a small nod. He smiled. "Just a little. Want to stay here or go inside?" Lila looked toward her mother for the first time. Her gaze was flat, not angry, but not reaching. Then she leaned closer to Gabriel. Gabriel looked up and finally met Victoria's eyes. She blinked, visibly shaken. I've never seen her do that," she said, voice cracked like fine porcelain. "With anyone?" "Not even me," Gabriel said nothing. He wasn't sure she expected him to. "She's always afraid of touch," Victoria added, eyes narrowing, searching his face for the answer he wouldn't give. "Why you?" He hesitated. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "Maybe because I didn't try to fix her." That struck something in Victoria. She looked away, swallowing hard. Another long beat passed. Then, against everything her instincts screamed, she spoke again. "I don't suppose," she began slowly, "you could stay?" Gabriel blinked. "Stay?" "Not for long," she added quickly, almost defensive. "Just a few hours, until she settles." He glanced at Lila, then back at Victoria. "I thought I was fired." "You were trespassing," she snapped. Then her voice softened. "But I can make an exception." Gabriel stood slowly. Lila didn't panic. She followed, holding onto his shirt lightly. He faced Victoria fully now. "I'm not a nanny," he said, "or a therapist. I'm just a janitor." She straightened. "I know exactly what you are, Mr. Turner," he said. "Gabriel Turner." "Well, Mr. Turner," she said, smoothing her blazer, eyes sharp again. "I'm not asking for credentials. Just results." Then she stepped aside, opened the door behind her. "Come in," she said. "She clearly wants you." Gabriel hesitated, then walked through. Leela followed, and behind them, Victoria Hale, billionaire, CEO, control freak, closed the door on a world she no longer understood. The study smelled like leather, citrus polish, and old judgment. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books that looked untouched but intimidating, like silent witnesses. The late afternoon sun poured through the tall windows, hitting every surface with deliberate sharpness. Gabriel sat stiffly in a high-backed chair that wasn't made for comfort. His uniform still smelled faintly of bleach. Across from him, Victoria Hale perched on the edge of a mahogany desk, arms crossed, legs perfectly still, eyes dissecting him. "So," she said, tone clipped, "tell me exactly what qualifies you to be alone with my daughter." Gabriel folded his hands in his lap. "Nothing. On paper. That's not an answer," she replied. He met her gaze. "I'm not certified. I've never taken courses. I don't have a degree." "Then what exactly are you?" Her voice didn't rise, but it sliced. "I'm a janitor." She didn't blink. "But I had a sister," he added. A pause. Victoria tilted her head, slightly. "She was nonverbal," Gabriel continued. "Autistic, brilliant, funny. Had this way of arranging crayons by gradient, not color names. She didn't speak much, but she understood more than most people ever knew." "And what happened to her?" Gabriel's throat tightened. "She passed. Complications from pneumonia. She was 17. Victoria's arms, slowly, lowered. Her eyes didn't soften, but the sharpness dulled. I helped raise her. My mum worked nights, so it was me getting her to school, helping her regulate, setting up her visual schedule cards, swapping out clothes tags, dealing with teachers who didn't understand why she wouldn't sit still. I didn't get training, I got experience, every day. The kind you can't put on a resume." Victoria was quiet for a long beat. "And after she died?" Gabriel shrugged lightly. "I tried working in group homes, but the pay was rough. Hours worse. I fell behind on rent, took the cleaning job at Hale Corporation because it was steady. Didn't expect." He glanced toward the hallway, where faint giggles echoed from Lila's room. Victoria followed his look, but said nothing, her hands pressed flat against the desk behind her. "She's not broken," Gabriel said suddenly. "Don't treat her like a project. She's trying to survive a world not built for her." "You assume I don't understand my own child?" Victoria snapped. "I assume you're scared," he replied, "and trying to control everything to avoid feeling it." That landed hard, silence again. The only sound was the distant hum of the air system, and Lila's quiet voice, humming behind a closed door. The same girl who had screamed for hours now echoed with tiny melodies. Gabriel shifted to stand. "I'll head out now. I know I probably crossed too many lines already, but Victoria spoke before he could get far. What if I asked you to stay?" she said. He turned back, brow furrowed. "Temporarily," she clarified. "As a trial." He blinked. "Doing what?" Mopping her nightmares. She didn't smile. Observing her. Helping her. Translating, apparently. He sat again, slowly. "I'm offering you double your current wage, full-time hours, on-site. You'll have quarters in the guest wing. That's not a job, that's surveillance." "It's care. Customized," she corrected. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "You want to pay me full-time to just sit with your daughter?" "To regulate her," Victoria said. "To calm her when others can't. To teach me what I clearly don't know, and to stop her from harming herself when the lights flicker wrong." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, exhaled slowly. "I'm not sure you can afford what this really costs," he said finally. "I can afford everything," she replied. "That's what scares me." Another long pause. Then Gabriel said, "I want ground rules. Boundaries. I'm not raising her. I'm not fixing her. I'm just here. And you report to me." He nodded. "Only if you listen." Victoria extended a hand. 3 days, trial period. After that, we talk again." Gabriel stared at her palm, then shook it. Neither of them smiled. From down the hall, a door creaked open, and Lila's voice called faintly, "Gaby!" Victoria's hand dropped. Gabriel stood. "I'll take first shift," he said. Victoria watched him disappear down the hallway, her expression unreadable. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was holding all the power, and she wasn't entirely sure she wanted it back. The guest wing was quiet in the kind of way that made you question your own footsteps. Every surface gleamed, every picture frame aligned to the millimeter. It wasn't welcoming, it was surgical. Gabriel stood in the doorway of the room Victoria had assigned him. It was technically spacious, but it felt hollow. Neutral beige walls, minimal furniture, a desk without drawers, a bed that had never been slept in. The type of room meant for temporary people passing through. He set down his duffel bag, small, frayed, and far too light. It held a change of clothes, his toothbrush, and a folded photo of his mother and sister pressed between two paperbacks. That was it. He sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle in. This wasn't the plan. He'd taken the janitor job because it was safe, predictable, clock in, clean, clock out. Invisible labor in the shadows of towers built by other people's money. No responsibility, no attachments, no expectations. Now here he was, in a billionaire's estate, being asked to care for a child with stormwater in her lungs and galaxies in her eyes. A child who didn't speak to anyone except him. He pulled the photo from the bag and stared at it. His mother, back when her hands still moved without shaking. Apron dusted in flour, and Ania, 10 years old, beaming from the floor where she sat cross-legged with a puzzle that she refused to solve the normal way. He'd promised both of them he'd make it out, make something of himself, build stability. He hadn't promised to come back to this, to autism care, to sleepless nights, to the sharp edge of not knowing if you were helping or hurting. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from the nursing home. No words, just a missed call and the timestamp. He didn't open it. He already knew what it would say. Medicaid delays, late invoice, possible move. Always something. He rubbed his forehead, palms gritty with old soap residue. He could walk, say no, return to night shifts and quiet floors, and the fading belief that he didn't owe the world more than mopped linoleum. But Lila's face flashed in his mind again. Not during the screaming, but after. The stillness, the way she'd leaned into his chest, like gravity knew his name. That wasn't just a moment, that was a turning. He exhaled, long and slow, and stood. He unpacked the photo and placed it on the desk, not facing out, but angled toward the bed, watching, judging. He made the bed not because it was messy, but because order made thought easier. He hung his coat in the wardrobe, folded his second shirt, lined his shoes. Then he sat again, not in hesitation this time, but in choice. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about Lila. It was about whether he could still believe in his own usefulness, whether his care meant anything when it wasn't sanctioned by a degree or tied to a job title, whether presence alone could count as purpose. He wasn't here as a professional. He was here because a little girl had reached out for him when no one else made sense, and now, with nothing but his name, his hands, and the weight of promises buried under grief, he was choosing to show up, not as a janitor, not as a savior, but as a man who couldn't walk away from a child that reminded him too much of what he'd lost. He picked up the photo again, looked at Ania's grin. "I won't mess this up," he murmured. "Not again." He stood, squared his shoulders, and stepped into the hallway. The mansion was still, lit with soft motion sensors. Somewhere down the corridor, the hum of Lila's projector buzzed faintly. Gabriel walked toward it. This wasn't a job anymore. It was a wager, on trust, on instinct, on the belief that sometimes the people who clean up after the powerful are the ones most qualified to fix what's quietly breaking. And he was all in. The playroom was bathed in warm light, filtered through sheer curtains that danced slightly in the breeze. The room was silent except for the soft clicks of wooden blocks tapping against each other. Lila sat cross-legged on the padded rug, her hair slightly tousled, her fingers moving with precise rhythm. She was building something, color-coded towers, 4 blocks each, arranged by shade rather than size. Gabriel stood in the doorway for a moment before entering. He said nothing, made no sound. He simply removed his shoes, placed them neatly by the door, and sat across from her, far enough not to crowd, close enough to be present. Lila didn't look up. She reached for a red block, inspected it, and gently added it to the third tower. Then another, orange this time. Gabriel folded his hands in his lap, waited. 3 minutes passed, 5, 10, then a single green block rolled toward him. He looked down. Lila hadn't moved her gaze, but her hand had shifted, just enough to push it toward his side of the rug. He picked it up, slowly, like it was made of glass. She paused, watching from the corners of her eyes. Gabriel didn't say thank you, didn't praise. He simply mirrored her, lifting the block, tapping it twice against the floor, then placing it next to his knee, upright, steady. Lila reached into the bin again, blue this time, then purple. She built another small tower. Gabriel watched her pattern, noted her rhythm. Every fourth block was placed slightly to the left, a pattern within a pattern. He mimicked it with the blocks she gave him. Yellow, orange, red. A pause, then one more, grey. She slid that one with her foot. Gabriel smiled, just a little. He placed the grey block off-center, as she had, imperfect on purpose. Lila blinked, then adjusted one of her own blocks to match. His, no words, no cheers, just two quiet people sinking breath by breath. Gabriel's eyes drifted around the room. Shelves lined with books she likely couldn't read yet. A sensory swing tucked in the corner. A soft tent of fabric and pillows that looked untouched. But she didn't need any of that. She just needed someone who didn't demand anything from her. He didn't know what time it was. Didn't care. Her fingers grazed his knee as she passed him another block. This time she looked up, briefly. Their eyes met for less than a second, and then she went back to her tower. Gabriel didn't move. Somewhere behind the one-way mirror, someone was watching. Through the tinted glass, Preston Hale stood quietly, arms crossed. He had returned early from his trip, unannounced. He was supposed to be in Chicago until Thursday, but a text from Victoria last night had changed his itinerary. You need to see this for yourself. So now he stood in the observation alcove, silent, unmoving, unsure. He'd seen Lila in this room dozens of times, alone, or worse, flailing, throwing blocks, screaming when someone tried to help her sort them correctly. But now she was calm, focused, engaged. She was sharing. Preston studied the man across from her. He didn't recognize him, not staff, not security, not the therapist who came twice a week and left with apologetic eyes. A stranger. Preston leaned slightly forward, watching as Lila reached into the bin, selected a single white block, and, without hesitation, placed it in Gabriel's palm. Gabriel didn't flinch. He turned it over once, then twice, then placed it down with care beside the others. Preston's brow furrowed. He turned to the intercom panel beside the glass, pressed the button. Victoria's voice came through, sharp and controlled. Yes? Who is he? Preston asked, eyes still on the glass. A pause. A janitor, she replied. Silence. Preston let go of the button. Below, on the other side of the glass, Lila giggled softly. Not loud, not showy, just a single breathy laugh that lit her face for the span of a heartbeat. Gabriel didn't react, but his eyes softened, and behind the glass, Preston stepped back from the window, speechless. The hallway just outside the playroom was hushed, the soundproofing excellent, but not perfect. Victoria stood in the doorway, barely breathing, one hand resting on the frame. She wasn't supposed to be there. She had emails to answer, a board meeting in 40 minutes, 2 press requests pending. But none of that mattered. Inside, Lila was sitting on the rug again, her knees tucked neatly beneath her, surrounded by color. She was building towers, blocks grouped by hue, 4 in a row. The same pattern Gabriel had followed that morning, but this time she was leading. Gabriel sat nearby, closer than before. Not opposite, but beside her now. Their shoulders were just a breath apart. He hadn't reached for her, hadn't instructed, hadn't guided. He simply mirrored her movements again, his own small stack forming quietly at her pace. There were no words, only silence, and the soft click of wood on wood. Victoria's eyes locked on her daughter's profile, the gentle crease of her brow, the way her tongue peeked out slightly when she concentrated. Then something shifted. Lila smiled, just a little, just for a moment, but it was real, not forced, not coached, not coaxed by therapy puppets or reward charts. A real, soft, barely there smile. Gabriel didn't react with fanfare. He didn't try to capture it, didn't ruin it by acknowledging it aloud. He simply placed another block. Let it pass. Victoria pressed a hand to her chest. She had not seen that smile in months, maybe longer. Every therapy session, every expert flown in, every dietary overhaul, every behavioral graph, and none of it had made Lila smile like this. It wasn't even the smile that stunned her most. It was the permission. Lila was letting this man sit beside her. No flinching, no tension. She leaned slightly toward him, as if his quiet presence was a part of her structure now, like a wall she could build next to, safely. Victoria's throat tightened. She stepped back from the doorway, leaned against the cool marble, and closed her eyes. How had this happened? How had a man with no credentials, no polished resume, no plan, become the first person her daughter allowed into her private world? Was it because he didn't expect anything? Was it because he didn't praise, didn't demand, didn't hover with anxiety? She remembered the sound of his voice last night, steady even, a low hum rather than a directive. "I'm not here to fix her," he had said, and she hadn't understood it then. But now, watching through that thin sliver of space in the door, she felt the full weight of it. Lila didn't need fixing. She needed space. She needed permission. She needed stillness, mirrored back to her by someone who knew grief so well it spoke her language. Victoria's eyes opened again. Inside the room, Lila pushed a yellow block toward Gabriel's foot. He picked it up, turned it once in his hand, and balanced it perfectly on top of the structure they were building together, one they hadn't planned but were forming anyway. Victoria stepped back further, fully out of sight now. She didn't go far. She sat on the hallway bench, unused, decorative, and for the first time in a long while, allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, from the quiet ache of hope. It had been so long since she let herself believe things could get better without a fight. Inside the room, Lila laughed again, this time a little louder, a little freer. Gabriel didn't laugh back, he just smiled, and added another block. The knock came like gunfire, sharp, repeated, uninvited. Victoria looked up from her laptop, eyes narrowing. The clock read 8:52 a.m. Too early for meetings, too late for deliveries. She opened the front door, halfway before a black badge flashed into view. "Child Welfare Services," the woman said flatly, already stepping forward. "We've received an anonymous report regarding possible neglect, endangerment, and the presence of an unlicensed caregiver in the home." Gabriel appeared in the hallway behind her, holding Lila's weighted blanket in one hand. His eyes caught the badge instantly. 2 more agents entered, one with a clipboard, the other with a camera slung across his chest. "I'm sorry, what is this?" Victoria's voice was ice. "This is an active welfare check," the woman repeated. "On behalf of the Department of Children and Family Services, your daughter, Lila Hale, is listed as a minor with special medical and developmental considerations. We're obligated by state law to ensure her safety when allegations are filed." Victoria stepped forward. Allegations of what? "We're not permitted to share the content of anonymous reports until preliminary assessment," the woman replied, brushing past her into the foyer. "We will need to speak to the child and her primary caregiver separately." "She doesn't respond well to strangers," Gabriel said, quietly. The woman looked him up and down. "You are?" "Gabriel King," he said. "I help with Lila's care." "Are you a licensed therapist, nurse, behavioral specialist?" "No," Then you are not qualified to intervene during this process. He stepped aside, jaw tight. Where is the child currently? The second agent asked. Her playroom, Victoria replied, strained, with noise-cancelling headphones. She doesn't know you're here. Yet. That will need to change, the first woman said. She doesn't speak, Victoria said. She might scream. Flinch. Shut down. She'll be fine, came the clipped reply. Gabriel stepped between the agent and the hallway. No, she won't, he said calmly. You're going to barge into her sensory safe space, flash your badge, speak loud, and trigger a meltdown that could take days to regulate. We're trained for… No, you're not, Gabriel snapped. You're trained to tick boxes. I've lived this. The room went still. The lead agent's hand shifted to the pen at her side. Sir, if you continue to obstruct… Victoria raised a hand. Let's not escalate. You want to see Lila? Fine. But she speaks through objects, blocks, gestures. You scare her, and you'll lose your only chance at meaningful observation. The agent considered her. We'll proceed under protocol, but you'll remain present. Gabriel nodded. I'll be silent. Like I always am with her. The agents followed Victoria down the hall, their shoes too loud on the hardwood. Gabriel trailed behind, heart pounding. Leela sat in her playroom, arranging fabric squares by texture. When she saw Gabriel at the door, she smiled faintly. Then her eyes caught the stranger's. Behind him, her body stiffened instantly. One of the agents stepped forward. Hi, Lila. She whimpered, loudly. Gabriel crouched, placed the blanket gently beside her without touching. Lila picked it up, wrapped it around herself, and curled into the corner. Do not photograph her like this, Victoria snapped as the man raised the camera. She is under official review. She is in distress. The lead agent raised a hand, signaling to lower the camera. Gabriel turned to the wall and took 3 blocks, red, blue, green. He placed them in a line, slowly. Lila peeked from her blanket, her fingers extended, trembling, but reached for the green. She slid it back toward him. She's communicating, Gabriel said. Let her finish. Victoria's arms were crossed tightly, eyes brimming but unreadable. 10 long minutes passed in silent observation. Lila never spoke, but she handed Gabriel 5 objects, not one misplaced, not one thrown, and when he stood to leave, she tugged his sleeve once, gently. Victoria turned to the lead agent. Now, what exactly was in this anonymous report? The woman hesitated. We received claims that a non-relative man had been given unsupervised access to your daughter, that your child had bruises on her upper arms, that she'd been heard screaming daily, that she'd been isolated without medical care. Gabriel's fists clenched. Victoria stepped forward, voice shaking. She screams because she's in pain from sounds you don't even hear. She flinches from fabrics you wear without thinking, the bruises, from her own teeth, when she self-regulates, and the man. He saved her, Victoria said, when no one else could reach her. The agents exchanged a glance. We found no physical harm, no signs of malnourishment, no unsanitary conditions, and no evidence of negligence. But it's clear someone wanted us here. Someone who had enough personal knowledge of your home to describe specific furniture, layouts, routines. Gabriel frowned. Someone inside? Victoria's eyes narrowed. Or someone watching. The agents packed their folders, thanked her mechanically, and left. The front door closed. Silence returned. Gabriel leaned against the wall. Victoria stared ahead. We're being targeted, she said. He nodded once. And I don't think it's about Lila, she added. His eyes locked with hers. No, he said. It's about you. The glass walls of the top-floor conference room turned silver in the afternoon haze, casting Victoria's silhouette across the polished floors. She stood alone at the head of the long table, arms folded, eyes locked on the encrypted tablet in her hand. Across the screen, the IT director's voice crackled through a secure line. "We traced the IP address that submitted the welfare complaint," he said. "It was masked through multiple VPNs, Eastern Europe, Singapore, then routed back through a private server in Colorado. And? We broke through." Victoria didn't blink. "Who?" A pause. "Sylvia Warner." The name hit the room like a glass dropped on marble. Gabriel, seated at the far end of the table, lifted his gaze. "Who's that?" he asked. Victoria's eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a flat line. "She used to be my executive assistant. 3 years ago. Brilliant, manipulative, ambitious beyond her title. I caught her leaking prototype specs to a competitor during a beta launch." Gabriel leaned forward. "What happened?" "I gave her a choice. Resign quietly or face legal action and never work in tech again. And she chose silence. She chose revenge," Victoria said coldly. She tossed the tablet onto the table. The screen froze on Sylvia's LinkedIn profile. New headshot, new title, new company. Warner Innovations, a direct rival to Hale Analytics, funded through aggressive venture capital channels. Poaching staff, leaking stories. And now, this. Gabriel exhaled slowly. "She tried to weaponize your daughter." "No," Victoria corrected. "She tried to humiliate me. To paint me as unstable, unfit, vulnerable. She knew the only way to do that wasn't through press. It was through system failure, through invoking the state." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "How far will she go?" Victoria turned toward the city skyline, voice steady. "As far as I let her." The door opened. Victoria's legal counsel entered. A woman in her late 50s with steel-rimmed glasses and decades of quiet power stitched into every step. "We reviewed the findings," the lawyer said. "The complaint is inadmissible, but the invasion of privacy and reputational damage is real." "I recommend civil action." "Not yet," Victoria said. "I want her exposed. Publicly. Not just sued, discredited. I want her investors to pull out before she even hears the word subpoena." Gabriel watched silently. The shift in Victoria was immediate, her spine straighter, tone sharper, her gaze colder than he'd seen since they met. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a CEO at war. The lawyer gave a curt nod. "We'll begin compiling evidence. We've already located 3 former employees of Warner Innovations willing to testify. She's built her empire on stolen code and intimidation." Gabriel glanced down at the block still in his jacket pocket. Lila had handed it to him that morning, a small blue cube with a chipped corner. It had no purpose, no function, but she had trusted him to hold it. And now, somehow, he was sitting in the war room of one of the most powerful women in the city. "She's underestimating you," he said quietly. Victoria turned to him. "Everyone does." "Not anymore." Their eyes held. Then Victoria walked to the end of the table, stood across from Gabriel, and said, "I don't want you just watching Lila now. I want you in this room, from now on, when things move. I want your read on them. You notice things others don't." Gabriel blinked. "You want me in strategy meetings." "I want you everywhere Sylvia thought you'd never belong." He didn't smile, but he nodded. Victoria picked up the tablet again, scrolling through timestamps, document leaks, a growing web of sabotage. "She wanted to erase me," Victoria said, "so I'll make sure she's remembered for exactly who she is." Outside the window, storm clouds gathered over the skyline. War was coming. But Victoria Hale no longer stood alone. The courthouse steps were crawling with cameras. Victoria stepped out of the black SUV, her face calm, every inch the composed executive. But Gabriel could feel the tension in her knuckles as she gripped her handbag, just a beat too tight. Beside them, her legal team formed a human wall, shielding her from questions shouted like bullets. "Ms. Hale, is it true your daughter's being raised by a janitor?" "Who is Gabriel King? Did you vet his record?" Is Lila safe in your home? Gabriel kept his head down, a hand protectively brushing the small of Victoria's back as they entered the marble lobby. Inside, it was worse. Reporters filled the gallery. The hearing was open to the press. A motion Sylvia's attorneys had fought for and won. They wanted public spectacle. They wanted Victoria Hale to squirm under scrutiny, to fall, to bleed. But Victoria didn't bleed in public. She sat tall, chin high. Lila was not present. Per court order, she remained home with a state-assigned therapist, another form of punishment. Gabriel sat 2 rows behind Victoria's legal team, hands clasped, wearing a second-hand suit that didn't quite fit across the shoulders. The judge entered. Gavel struck. Proceedings began. The prosecution painted a picture of negligence. They cited Gabriel's lack of credentials, his criminal record, petty theft at 19, his employment as unqualified domestic staff. They showed blurry surveillance photos of him and Lila on the garden swing, of him entering her playroom, of her touching his hand. She cannot speak, the prosecutor said, so we must speak for her. And what do these images show? An employee, an untrained man, granted unchecked access to a vulnerable child. Victoria's lawyer stood, voice crisp. Objection. These are public spaces, and my client was present for the majority of these interactions. The judge waved it forward. Then Sylvia Warner's lawyer took the floor. He smiled too much. He spoke slowly, patronizingly, like the room needed extra time to understand the gravity of Victoria's recklessness. She entrusted her daughter, he said, to a man who mops floors, who does not have a college degree, who lied by omission about his involvement in the child's care. Victoria's hands were clenched in her lap. Gabriel's jaw tightened. The lawyer continued, Miss Hale, do you feel your daughter is better served by a janitor than by the dozens of board-certified specialists she has access to? Silence. Then Victoria spoke. She's better with him than with anyone else. Gasps in the room. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. And why is that? Because he doesn't ask her to be different than she is. The lawyer chuckled. And that's your standard for childcare? Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's more than anyone else ever gave her. They called Gabriel next. He walked slowly to the stand. Every camera in the room followed him. Every pair of eyes took him in. His skin, his calloused hands, the fraying collar of his shirt. They weren't expecting eloquence. They were expecting guilt or fear. He gave them neither. State your name for the court. Gabriel King. And your occupation? I'm a janitor. At Hale Analytics. And your role in the Hale residence? I clean. I take out the trash. I mop. And? I listen. Laughter. Murmurs. The judge called for silence. The lawyer stepped forward. Mr. King, how did you become involved in the care of Lila Hale? Gabriel looked out over the courtroom, then down at his hands. I was on the 4th floor. No one's supposed to be there. But I heard a sound, screaming, furniture moving. I followed it. I found her. Alone. She was hitting her head on a shelf. No one was coming. The room held its breath. What did you do? I sat down. I signed one word. Safe. She looked at me. Then she stopped. And why did she trust you, Mr. King? I don't know. The lawyer smiled. You have no explanation? Gabriel paused. Then, my sister was nonverbal. She used to scream when the light flickered, or when cereal changed brands. People thought she was broken, but she wasn't. She just needed silence, someone who'd sit still long enough to see her. He looked toward Victoria. That's all I did. The prosecutor stepped in again. Mr. King, did you ever take Lila out of the house without permission? No. Did you ever touch her inappropriately? No. Did you ever represent yourself as a therapist? No. I told her mother the truth. Then why? The prosecutor said, voice rising. Did you stay? Gabriel met his gaze. Because no one else did. The room erupted. The judge called for order, banging the gavel 3 times. Silence fell. The judge leaned forward, peering over glasses. "Mr. King, do you consider yourself this child's guardian?" "No," Gabriel said. "I'm her mirror." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "She lets me in when I'm quiet. When I wait, when I don't try to fix her, I don't teach her anything. I follow her." The judge turned to the lawyers. "I've heard enough." They deliberated briefly, papers shuffled, legal murmurs. Then, "In light of the testimony and lack of evidence of abuse, this court finds no cause for legal intervention. The child remains in the care of Miss Hale and Mr. King." Gabriel looked up. "Your presence in the Hale household is not only permitted, it is encouraged. The court recognizes your role not merely as staff, but as protector." Victoria inhaled sharply. The word hung in the room, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Protector. Outside, the press surged, but inside that courtroom, a janitor had become a witness. A man unseen had spoken, and been heard, and for the first time in a very long time, justice had a human face. Late afternoon, sunlight streamed through the conservatory windows, draping golden warmth over the soft rug where Lila sat cross-legged with her hands tucked in her lap. The chaos of courtrooms and reporters felt like a world away here, filtered out by the tall glass walls, the filtered air, the presence of quiet and color. Gabriel sat beside her, one leg bent, the other stretched, cradling a small board with 4 symbols drawn in dry erase marker. He held up his hand, shaped it slowly. "This means more," he said, fingers bringing together and apart gently. Lila blinked, then looked down at her own hands. Victoria sat on a cushion just behind her daughter, not interfering, but present, barefoot, jacket off, sleeves rolled. She looked almost like someone who belonged on the floor, not just at a boardroom table. Gabriel turned to her. "You too." Victoria hesitated. "I'm not sure I can do it right." "It's not about right," he said. "It's about reaching." He showed the motion again. Victoria mirrored it, slowly, a little stiff. Lila looked from one to the other, curious. Gabriel smiled, lifted a soft foam block. "More?" He signed again. Lila didn't answer, but her head tilted, an almost imperceptible nod. Gabriel handed her the block. They repeated the motion, then Gabriel held up his fingers in a gentle arc across his chin. "This means, thank you." Victoria tried it, a little less stiff now. Gabriel glanced at Lila. "You want to try?" She didn't move, but her eyes flicked to his hands, then her own, then, barely. She brushed her fingertips across her chin. It was clumsy, it was off angle, but it was real. Gabriel didn't correct her. "Beautiful," he said softly. Victoria swallowed hard. "What about love?" He paused, then brought his middle fingers to his chest, crossed his fists over one another. "This one's special." From here, Victoria followed slowly, awkward at first, then again, this time smoother. Gabriel nodded. Lila was watching, completely still. Gabriel looked at her. "You want to try, Lila?" No answer. Victoria leaned forward gently. "You don't have to, but I'd like to say it to you, every day, whether you answer or not." She signed it again. "Love!" Lila's fingers twitched, then slowly, trembling, unsure, she raised her right hand, brought it to her chest, crossed her arms clumsily. The movement was broken, unsteady, out of order, but it was unmistakable. Victoria's hand went to her mouth. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just breathed, once, like someone who hadn't realized they'd been holding it in for years. Gabriel said nothing. He let the moment stretch, safe, silent. Lila leaned gently against her mother's shoulder. Not a hug, not full contact, just trust. Gabriel picked up the marker and added a 5th word to the board. Safe. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. Lila reached out and touched the word. And for the first time, Victoria didn't look afraid of what came next. She looked home. The fire crackled softly in the living room hearth, casting dancing shadows on the ivory walls. Outside, the evening wind rustled through the garden trellises, but inside, time moved slower. Thicker. Victoria sat curled in the corner of the long leather couch, a wool throw draped over her knees, her gaze fixed on the low-burning fire as though it were showing her a film only she could see. Gabriel sat in the armchair opposite, silent, letting the silence stretch. "You ever lose someone?" she asked finally, "in a way that doesn't end with a funeral?" Gabriel looked up, waited a beat before answering. "Yes." Victoria nodded like that answer had been enough. Her fingers tightened around the mug of untouched tea in her hands. "My husband's name was Daniel," she said quietly. "We met in undergraduate. He wasn't like me. He was gentle, had more time for clouds than spreadsheets. I thought that made him weak, but it turns out he just understood what really mattered before I ever did." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile used to mask the fault lines beneath. When Lila was born, he was the one who noticed. Before the doctors, before the charts, he'd say, "She's not broken, V. She's just tuned to a different frequency." Gabriel leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Victoria's eyes were glossy but dry. "I didn't listen. I was too busy building the company, chasing milestones, fixing things." She looked over at him. "Except her. I didn't know how to fix her. She didn't need fixing." "I know that now," Victoria whispered. Silence again. "I came home late one night, pitch meeting with investors. Daniel was on the floor of the nursery, asleep with Lila on his chest. There were books everywhere. He'd been trying to learn sign language. Flashcards on the floor. Her voice cracked. She swallowed it down. The next morning, he was gone. Massive heart attack. 38 years old. Gabriel inhaled quietly. I couldn't look at Lila after that. Not really. She reminded me too much of everything I missed. Every second he gave that, I didn't. So I hired experts, built walls, called it control. "You called it survival," Gabriel said gently. She blinked, looked at him. He continued, "You did what you had to do to stay afloat. That doesn't make you heartless." "It made me absent," she said, voice thin. And she knew it. They sat there, the only sound the faint ticking of the antique clock over the mantel. Victoria took a shaky breath. "I thought if I kept everything running, if I kept moving, eventually I'd outrun the grief." "You don't outrun it," Gabriel said. "You just carry it different." Victoria turned to him, really turned this time. "You speak like someone who's done this before." "I held my sister's hand the day she died," Gabriel said simply. "Doctors said she wouldn't understand. But I signed to her anyway. I told her she could rest." His voice didn't break. It didn't need to. Victoria's eyes glistened again, but she didn't cry. Instead, she exhaled slowly and placed the mug down on the glass coffee table. "Gabriel." He looked at her. "You've called me Mom since the day we met. I've earned a lot of titles in my life, but tonight, can you not use any of them?" He gave her a soft smile. She waited. Then, "Say it." He nodded, voice warm. "Victoria." Her name had never sounded softer, and in that moment, something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. She reached for the flashcards Daniel once used, still preserved in a drawer nearby, and handed one to Gabriel. It read, "Hope, the sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long amber streaks across the nursery walls." The room glowed in warm pastels, soft pinks, creams, and the faint blue of twilight leaking through gauzy curtains. Lila sat on the padded rug, gently stacking a tower of blocks, her face focused and serene. Victoria knelt a few feet away, legs tucked under her, hands folded nervously in her lap. Every muscle in her body was still. Gabriel leaned quietly in the doorway, arms crossed, letting the moment breathe. Lila placed the final block, crooked and slightly off-center. It wobbled. She stared at it. Then, suddenly, she looked up. Her eyes met her mother's, wide, still, clear. "Mama." The word came out whole, unforced, soft, but not a whisper. Victoria froze. The entire world seemed to narrow into that 1 second. Every clock stopped, every breath suspended in awe. Tears hit her cheeks before she even knew she was crying. Lila blinked, tilting her head, confused by the reaction. Victoria crawled forward, hands shaking. "Say it again," she whispered, barely able to speak. "Please." But Lila had already turned back to her blocks, fingers tapping the side of the tower. Gabriel didn't move, didn't speak. He knew enough not to fill the silence. This was their moment. Victoria sat back on her heels, hand covering her mouth. The sound kept echoing in her ears like church bells. Mama. After years of silence, after hundreds of therapy hours, after journals and doctors and doubts, it had come like lightning on a clear day. She reached out slowly, not to grab, just to rest her, hand on the rug beside Lila's. The girl looked at it, then looked toward the doorway. Gabriel gave a small nod, as if giving her permission for something unspoken. Lila stood up, stepped closer. She reached out, first with her left hand, lightly touching her mother's shoulder. Then, without hesitation, she turned and placed her right hand on Gabriel's knee. He flinched, not out of fear, but because he knew the weight of what it meant. The room was completely still. The air was thick with something unspeakable. A bridge had formed, fragile, trembling, real. Victoria looked at him. Her lips trembled, but she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Gabriel slowly placed his hand over Lila's. She didn't pull away. The girl smiled, barely, just a flicker, but it was enough. Victoria reached up, touched her daughter's hand, and closed her eyes. It wasn't a miracle. It was a moment earned by every scar, every sacrifice, every silent hour that had come before. And in that moment, under the soft pink light of a room that once held nothing but distance, a new shape of family began to form, not with declarations, but with presence. 3 souls in one room, finally, fully, together. The guest suite had been converted into a quiet observation space for the afternoon. Victoria stood near the bookshelves, arms crossed, watching the soft interaction unfold. Dr. Lydia Chen, clinical psychologist and longtime developmental consultant, sat in a cushioned chair by the bay window, her notebook resting on her knee, though she hadn't written anything in 10 minutes. Lila was nestled between 2 beanbags on the rug, stacking wooden discs by color. Gabriel sat cross-legged across from her, not leading, just mirroring her movements. Every so often, he'd sign a color, blue, red, yellow, and Lila would mimic it without prompting. There was no coaching, no reward system, no charts, just connection. Dr. Chen finally exhaled and broke the silence. "I've seen Lila in 27 different sessions over 3 years. Victoria turned, silent. Dr. Chen continued. "She's never allowed eye contact this long. Never voluntarily touched another adult, never initiated mimicry outside of structured repetition." Gabriel didn't react. He was too focused on Lila's small hand reaching for the final disc. Dr. Chen turned to Victoria. "Has this been consistent?" Victoria nodded. "And escalating. 3 days ago, she called me Mama. Yesterday, she handed Gabriel her favorite toy." Dr. Chen looked back at the scene, her eyes softening. "He's not trained." "But he's attuned." Victoria tilted her head slightly, skeptical, but open. "Is that your professional term?" Dr. Chen smiled. "It is now." Lila held up the last disc and, without looking, reached back and pressed it into Gabriel's palm. He closed his hand around it, gently, then set it on top of her tower without a word. Dr. Chen scribbled something in her notebook. Finally, then stood. She walked over to Victoria and lowered her voice. "I can't explain it with data. I can't replicate it in controlled conditions. But if you're asking me, clinically, whether this man belongs in her daily life, my answer is yes. Victoria's eyes didn't leave her daughter. And if I'm asking not as a CEO, she said, voice low, but as her mother? Dr. Chen looked at her. Then my answer is louder. They watched as Gabriel signed, safe, and Lila echoed it, slower but with certainty. Dr. Chen folded her arms. He doesn't override her senses. He joins them. That's rare. That's sacred. Victoria nodded slowly. I brought you here to assess risk, she said. Dr. Chen gave a half smile. Then here's my formal report. You didn't just hire a janitor, Victoria. You invited in a miracle. Victoria didn't speak. She just stepped forward, sat quietly beside her daughter, and added her hands to the tower. This time, it didn't wobble. It held. The lawyer's office was silent, save for the quiet ticking of a brass clock on the wall. The mahogany table stretched between them like a line neither had ever dared cross, until now. Victoria sat poised in her tailored navy suit, but her hands were bare. No rings, no bracelets, only the faint tremble of her fingers betraying the weight of the moment. Gabriel sat across from her, shoulders squared but uncertain. He had dressed carefully, pressed shirt, clean shave, but still looked like the janitor who never quite felt comfortable on leather chairs. Between them lay a folder, thick, crisp, legal. Victoria's voice was even, but softer than usual. I'm revising my will. Gabriel didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure if this was an announcement, a warning, or a question. She continued. You've been in Lila's life for 4 months. But what you've done, no therapist, no specialist, no educator has come close. Gabriel shook his head. I didn't do anything special. I just stayed. That's exactly what no one else did, she said, eyes locked on his. She opened the folder. There's a clause in my estate plan, contingency guardianship, in the event of an accident or anything permanent. Until now, it's remained blank. He leaned back slightly, understanding dawning slowly. You're putting me in that line? Her voice wavered, just slightly. I'm not asking you to raise her alone. There are support systems, funds, instructions, but I need to know that if anything ever happens to me, Lila won't be abandoned, or institutionalized, or forgotten in some system. Gabriel looked down at his hands. They were calloused, still faintly stained from years of bleach and cleaning fluids. I'm not blood. You're more than blood, she said quietly. He swallowed hard. What if I fail? Victoria's jaw tightened, not in impatience but emotion. You won't. Because you see her, because she sees you. She slid the pen across the table. No one has ever been willing to be her bridge. You already are. Gabriel stared at the document. It wasn't money, it wasn't status, it was responsibility, it was trust, it was family, signed in ink. He picked up the pen, hand steady, signed his name beneath hers. The clock ticked again, but the moment felt suspended in something timeless. When he set the pen down, Victoria didn't say anything. She simply reached across and covered his hand with hers, and for the first time, it wasn't employer and employee. It was mother and protector, equal stewards of a fragile, brilliant soul. The modest brick building on 12th and Alder didn't look like much from the outside. A hand-painted sign above the entrance read, Camellia Center, a space for every voice. The parking lot was half full, the lobby bustling with volunteers setting up sensory stations and folding chairs for parents' night. But when Gabriel stepped through the glass doors, Leela's small hand in his, everything felt impossibly still. Victoria followed close behind, holding 2 bags of new toys they had brought for the donation drive. She watched the way heads turned, some with curiosity, others with recognition. A few staffers whispered, pointing gently toward the tall black man with careful eyes and a quiet child by his side. No one whispered disrespectfully. They whispered with awe. A coordinator approached with a wide grin. "You're Gabriel, right? Lila's guardian?" Gabriel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We've heard about what you've done. Would you, if you're willing, speak at the opening circle?" Gabriel looked to Victoria, unsure. She didn't answer with words. She simply stepped back, letting him decide. Minutes later, he stood in front of a half-circle of parents, educators, therapists, and volunteers. Leela sat cross-legged beside him, stacking soft blocks in silent focus. Gabriel's voice was rough, but steady. "I'm not a teacher. I'm not a doctor. I used to mop floors here, years ago, before this place became what it is now. And then one day, I met a little girl who reminded me of my sister. Same silence, same fire inside." He paused. "I didn't fix her. She's not broken. I didn't teach her to speak. She already had a language. I just listened." Someone in the back wiped their eyes. Another leaned forward, nodding. "I've learned that advocacy doesn't require credentials. It just requires staying, showing up, not making their world smaller to fit ours, but expanding ours to meet theirs." Applause rose, not thunderous but warm, sincere. A little boy with noise-cancelling headphones approached timidly and handed Gabriel a fidget cube. Gabriel knelt and accepted it with both hands, then returned it without a word. The boy grinned and ran back to his mum. That moment made more impact than 100 brochures. Later, at the activity table, Lila Daisolem offered her red block to a younger girl struggling with transitions. The girl blinked, then mirrored her. Two mothers nearby gasped softly. Victoria watched, heart swelling, as Gabriel crouched beside the girls, not to correct or guide, just to be there, present. Constant afterward, the coordinator pulled Gabriel aside. "We've been looking for someone like you for our parent mentorship program, not because you're perfect, but because you're real. You know what it's like on the ground." Gabriel didn't respond right away. He looked around the room, the laughter, the stimming, the imperfect joy, and then to Lila, who was now helping another child with blocks. He turned back. "I'd be honored." The center's founder handed him a new lanyard, not with a mop key, but with a badge that read, "Community Advocate, Gabriel Turner." Victoria stepped beside him. She didn't say much, just reached out and lightly tapped the badge. "It suits you," she whispered. Gabriel smiled, not wide, not flashy, but deeply, like a man who had found his place, not at the top, but at the center. The sun was low, casting long amber shadows across the marble floors of the West Conservatory. The house, once echoing with sterile silence, now pulsed softly with quiet life, soft music playing from the kitchen radio, Lila's gentle humming from the next room as she traced colors onto the window with washable markers. Gabriel stood by the archway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He'd just finished rinsing out the paint trays. He hadn't been asked to, but old habits didn't leave. Victoria stepped in, barefoot, carrying 2 mugs of chamomile tea. Her hair was down, sweater sleeves pushed to her elbows, no hint of boardroom armor. She handed one to him without a word. He took it, steam curled between them like a silent bridge. They sat, not across from each other, but side by side on the window bench, overlooking the garden that had once been overgrown, now half restored under Gabriel's quiet tending. "I used to think keeping things controlled was the same as keeping things safe," Victoria began, voice low. "That if I micromanaged every piece of Lila's world, she'd thrive." Gabriel didn't interrupt. He never did. She turned her mug in her hands. "But the moment she leaned into you, I saw it wasn't about control. It was about presence, about who she trusted to just be with her." Gabriel looked down at the tea. "She chose me before I ever believed I could be chosen." There was a long silence, but it wasn't empty. It was sacred. Victoria finally set her mug aside. Her fingers hovered, then rested lightly on the windowsill. "I don't want to lose what we've built here," she said, "not just for Lila." For me, he turned, surprised, but didn't speak. She clarified, soft but certain. I'm not asking for a declaration. I'm not rushing into something romantic. What I'm saying is, the door is open. You're not a guest. You're not an employee. You're part of this house, if you want to be. His breath caught. Victoria. She smiled gently. I know. This isn't love at first sight. This is love that stayed, that proved itself, that sat on cold floors and waited for screams to become silence, that mended things without claiming credit. His voice was barely a whisper. I've never been anyone's stay, just a pass-through. Well, she said, eyes gleaming with unspoken emotion, we don't need a fairy tale. We need consistency. We need someone who chooses us again tomorrow. Lila's footsteps padded in from the hall. She held 2 drawings, one of Gabriel holding her hand, the other of Victoria on the swing beside her. She placed them gently on the bench between them, then walked out again without a word. Gabriel picked up the sketch. Stick figures, crooked hearts, but it was perfect. She sees us, he said quietly. She always did, Victoria replied. We were just too busy proving ourselves to each other to notice. He looked at her then, really looked, no titles, no debts, just 2 people who had survived grief, shame and fear, and come out building something fragile but real. He nodded. I'll stay. She didn't rush forward, didn't hold him. She simply reached across the bench and laid her hand beside his, not over it, not claiming, just waiting. He turned his palm to meet hers, not with passion, with promise. There's a photo now, pinned quietly on the wall of the community center, just beside the bookshelf in the children's section. It isn't framed, it isn't printed in high resolution, but people stop to look every time. Gabriel, sitting beneath the old camphor tree, legs stretched out, head tilted back in a rare, unguarded laugh. Layla, asleep against his side, one hand still gripping his shirt. Between them lies a book of animal signs, half open, the page marked with a blue ribbon. Below the photo, hand-lettered in chalk on a wooden plaque, are just 8 words. Family is where the storm breaks, not begins. No one knows who wrote it. Victoria says she didn't. Gabriel wouldn't have dared, but somehow it's truer than any plaque money could buy. These days, Lila runs. She signs. She even sings, softly when she thinks no one is listening. Victoria laughs more, works less. Her hair is often pulled into a messy bun, and her emails end with, "Be kind, we're all figuring it out." And Gabriel, he teaches Wednesday afternoons at the center now. Not as a therapist, not as an expert, just as a man who showed up and stayed. He walks in wearing his old janitor boots, not because he has to, but because they remind him of where he came from. The soles are worn thin, but they carried him through a storm, through a building full of doors that were never meant for him, until he made one stay open. Parents listen to him, kids lean on him, and Victoria? Sometimes. She stands at the back of the room, arms crossed, eyes glistening, not because she's worried, but because she remembers. She remembers the day a stranger in a blue jumpsuit dared to kneel on a cold floor and say, "Safe," with just his hands. She remembers what it meant when her daughter believed him before anyone else did. At the end of each class, Gabriel turns off the lights, locks the door, and takes one last look at the photo beneath the tree. He doesn't linger. He doesn't need to. Because home isn't a place he passes through anymore. It's a place he helped build. And even if the world never knows the full story, even if no headlines write about the janitor who became a protector, it's all right. Some justice isn't loud. Some healing doesn't make noise. Sometimes it's just showing up and staying. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.